Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Chapter 2, Sankhya Yoga, Part 3. Dehinosmin yata dehe, kaumaram yavvanam jara, tata dehantara praptihi, dhirastatra na muhyati. Just as boyhood, youth, and old age are attributed to the soul through this body, even so it attains another body. The wise man, the enlightened one, does not get deluded about this. The body does not remain the same, but it always changes. It passes by stages through babyhood, youth, and old age. The statement Dehinos minyata dehe proves that the soul is separate and the body is separate. The soul is the seer and the body is the seen. Hence, the changes of babyhood and youth, etc., in the body are not in the soul. The soul is changeless. As one does not grieve for the body when it passes through babyhood, youth, and old age, similarly, one should not grieve when the soul passes on to another body. As babyhood, youth, and old age are the different stages of physical body, so attaining another body after death is the stage for the subtle and causal body. If we perceive in the right perspective, we come to know that the body does not pass through babyhood, youth, and old age only, but it changes every moment. Similarly, subtle and causal bodies also change every moment. Now the question arises that we can perceive our physical body, but we don't perceive our subtle and causal body and their change. Wakefulness, sleep, and sound sleep, respectively, are regarded as the states of physical, subtle, and causal bodies. In sleep, in dream, a baby sees itself a baby, a youth sees himself a youth, and an old man sees himself as an old man. It proves that the subtle body also changes. Similarly, in childhood, one gets more sound sleep than in youth, and in old age, it further decreases. It shows that there is a change in causal bodies also. Secondly, a man is more refreshed in his childhood and youth after sleeping than he is in his old age. It also proves a change in causal bodies. When one gets the body of a god, a bird, or an animal, or anything, because of identification of the self with that particular body, one thinks oneself the same. It is a change in subtle body. Similarly, the nature, the habit of a god is different from that of a bird or an animal. It shows change in causal body. A man passes through babyhood, youth, and old age, and thus there is a change in his state, but he experiences that he is the same. It proves that there is no change in his self, that is, soul. Here a doubt comes to our mind that we experience the change in the physical body, but we have no knowledge about our previous bodies after getting new bodies. The answer is that there is so much of pain at the time of death and rebirth that one forgets one's previous birth. When a man suffers from paralysis or old age, his memory becomes weak. Similarly, by the pangs of death and birth, one sinks into oblivion of his previous birth. But one who dies suddenly without any pain can have memory of his previous birth. When a man rises after a sound sleep, he says that he slept soundly and he was not aware of anything. It means that he knows that he was not aware of anything during sound sleep. This knowledge of nothingness by the self proves that the self existed even during the sound sleep. Thus, his own self existed before his sleep, during his sleep, and also after his sleep. That is, the soul exists continuously. None feels his non-existence at any time. Rather, he feels his existence incessantly. He who feels himself separate from the body realizes that he is liberated, and in that liberated state he ever remains. In that liberated state, he may not know what bodies he possessed in the past, but his realization that he is separate from the body remains intact. The wise man, that is, the enlightened one, is he who can discriminate between the real and the unreal. Such a man is never deluded, and he is not reborn because attachment for the gunas, that is, the qualities, modes, is the cause of birth in good and evil homes, and he breaks off his attachment with the qualities. Here, tatra has been used for the difference between the soul, which is the spirit, and the body, the real and the unreal, the permanent and the transient. It means that they are totally different, and he is never deluded about this because he knows that he is different from the body. Now, Sri Krishna Paramatma urges us that we should be indifferent to the sorrow and suffering arising from transitory and perishable things like body and so on. Matra spassastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkadaha agamapayino nityaha stam stitikshasva bharata. O son of Kunti, the sense objects which give rise to the feelings of heat and cold, pleasure and pain and so on are transitory and fleeting. Therefore, Arjuna, bear them patiently, remain unaffected by them or ignore them. The phrase tu has been used to explain that the transitory things such as bodies etc. are different from the permanent soul. Senses including the inner sense are called matra, and sparshaha means contact. Therefore, all the objects which are perceived by senses are called matra sparsha, that is, sense objects. Can the affinity with objects also be included in matra sparsha? No. The reason is that it is not the inner sense but the self which accepts this affinity, and that affinity remains even when the objects are lost. A woman was bereaved of her husband 50 years ago, but if anyone calls her the wife of her husband, Mr. A, she becomes alert even today. It shows that the assumed affinity has not yet broken off. It means that the objects are lost, yet the assumed affinity persists. Here, Shita, that is cold, and Ushna, that is hot, stand for favorable and unfavorable circumstances. The favorable circumstances gives us the pleasure while unfavorable ones give pain. If the term Sita and Ushna means cold and heat, then they will represent only the objects of touch and their meanings will be limited. They will not represent all sense objects and circumstances. Therefore, it is proper to take their meanings as favorable and unfavorable circumstances. The fact is that the favorable or desirable and unfavorable or undesirable circumstances and things can't give pleasure or pain, but it is affinity with them which is the cause of pleasure and pain. So, the Krishna Paramatma has called the objects Sukha Dukkada, that is, producers of pleasure and pain. All the objects have a beginning and an end. They are born and dissolved. So, they are Agama Payinaha, that is, they appear and disappear. Anityaha, it may be said that objects may not have pre-existence or post-existence, but in between they do exist. The Lord declares that as they are anitya, that is transient, they don't exist even in the interim. They change every moment. They change so swiftly that no one can see them again in the same form because they don't maintain the same shape the next moment. Therefore, Sri Krishna Paramatma has called all objects as anitya. It means that all the worldly objects are transitory and fleeting and they change every moment. Not only the objects but the senses, including the inner sense with which we perceive the objects, are also transitory. There is always a change in them. For example, the senses get tired by evening while working throughout the day and get refreshed in the morning after a night's sleep. Here, all the objects in a broader sense are called agama painaha, that is, appearing and disappearing. In a finer sense, they are called anitya, changing every moment. In a more finer way, they will be described in the 16th verse of this chapter as asat, that is, non-existent, while the soul described earlier as eternal will be described as sat, that is, ever-existent, in the 16th verse of this chapter. Mere knowledge of the agreeable and the disagreeable is not at all defective, but attachment and aversion to them or pleasure and pain in relation to them is an evil. Not to be affected by such an evil is expressed by the expression tam stitikshasva. Secondly, the body and the senses and their actions have a beginning and an end, while you as a spectator are different from them. They always change, but you never change. Therefore, you should remain unaffected by them. That is, you should have the ability to ignore them. To remain unaffected and untainted is called here titiksha. In the next verse, Sri Krishna Paramatma tells the result of remaining unaffected by the contacts of senses with their objects. Yam hi na vyatayantyete purusham purusharshaba samadukka sukham dhiram somrutattvaya kalpate. O best of men, the man to whom pain and pleasure are alike and who is not tormented by these sense objects becomes eligible for immortality. Men generally try to change the inevitable circumstances, but Arjuna, instead of trying to change them, has thought to attain benediction, which shows that he is the best of men. The man of steady wisdom remains alike in pleasure and pain. He is the experiencer of pleasure and pain only when he is attached to the three gunas, that is, qualities and modes, born of matter, that is, nature. But when he gets fixed in the self, he does not experience pleasure and pain and becomes unruffled. To the man of steady wisdom, the sense objects don't give pain. The pleasure ensuing from the contact of sense objects is perturbing, that is, vyata. Similarly, the pain arising from their separation is also perturbing. He who has an eye on equanimity cannot be happy or sad by these objects. Such a person knows the favorable and unfavorable circumstances, but he remains unaffected by them. They don't leave my impression on his mind. Such a man of steady wisdom becomes eligible for immortality. That is, he acquires capability to realize immortality. Being capable, he realizes immortality instantly because his immortality is axiomatic. It was only because of his affinity with objects and body that it was obscure. An exceptional fact. This human life has not been bestowed upon the man to experience pleasures and pain, but to attain the supreme peace, having obtained which he has nothing else to seek. If we remain greedy and desirous to acquire favorable circumstances, we shall not be able to make use of those circumstances because our energy will be wasted in enjoyment of those circumstances rather than in making proper use of them. Similarly, if we grieve in the unfavorable circumstances or in their possibility, we will not be able to make use of them, rather, we will be brooding over them. To get pleased with the favorable circumstances is their enjoyment. The use of favorable circumstances for mere maintenance of the body and for the welfare of poverty-stricken people is their proper use. Thus, riches in the form of favorable circumstances should be considered the property of the poor. We should neither be pleased with desirable circumstances nor displeased with undesirable ones. but we should make the best possible use of them. Otherwise, we shall have to suffer pain. There is a proper use of desirable circumstances if we have satisfied our needs. Use them to serve the needy and the destitute instead of enjoying them ourselves. Actually, our riches are for the needy and the poor, so we should utilize them for their welfare. These are the poor and destitute who have enabled the rich to be proud of their riches. Had all the others been multi-millionaires, could these millionaires have got pleasure and pride of their being millionaires? No, these poor and destitute people are the cause of their pleasure and pride. Therefore, the rich people should serve the desolate and the destitute as it is their duty to do so. But if they don't do so and enjoy the riches themselves, only they are thankless. Now, the question arises how to make use of the undesirable circumstances. The answer is that the undesirable circumstances are painful when there is a desire for pleasure. If that desire is renounced, the undesirable circumstances can't be painful. As a patient is given bitter medicines and painful injections, he does not get displeased. Rather, he is pleased because he knows that the bitter medicines and painful injections are the cures for his disease. Thus, it is the proper use of undesirable circumstances to bear the pain without having any grudge against it. If he gets displeased with bitter medicines, etc., that is brooding over unfavorable circumstances, it will result in great misery. If we enjoy pleasures and are tormented by pain, we may get heaven or hell, but can't be eligible for salvation because salvation is attained by those who remain alike in pleasure and pain. Sri Krishna Paramatma in the 14th verse has said that the contacts between the senses and their objects give rise to the feelings of pleasure and pain, but they are transitory and fleeting. The moment we acquire them, their decay and parting start. They were neither with us in the past nor will remain in future, and at present also they are going into naught. But by enjoying them, we are spoiling our nature and are depriving ourselves of the attainment of salvation. Therefore, if we make proper use of the available circumstances, we shall rise above pleasure and pain and attain the state of the highest bliss.